Okay, so one other not so tiny thing that you may have to, well, that you will have to deal with when applying a texture, like an image to a Maya texture like this, is the aspect ratio of the image compared to the plane you're putting it on. Now, this is only for like I'm putting a picture in a frame, right? I'm putting a painting on the wall. This does not apply to texturing like the shingles on the roof of a house, right? That's a whole different thing. This is only for I want pictures on my wall situation, or for the sort of toon shading thing that we're going to be doing in one of the videos. So knowing the aspect ratio of this, meaning does this in here resemble how it looks in here? Let me turn on there it is. Right, so it's supposed to look like this. It's supposed to be this wide by this tall. Eh. So this was me eyeballing it earlier, and we could tell it's not wide enough. And so I'd have to kind of fix that. Now I was going from memory. But can we get closer? Can we figure out something that's a little bit closer to the actual aspect ratio of this image? Aspect ratio meaning the ratio of height to width, not an exact number, not meaning it's 12 by 9 or 900 pixels by 500 pixels or something like that, right? Because that's not what we care about, because the measurements in Maya are not the same as the measurements in pixels. Those two are not related. What we're worrying about is how much taller is it than it is wide. And there's actually a trick we can use in Photoshop. I mean, you can do the math. If you would like to sit there and do some math to figure out what the ratio of 671 to 900 is, cool. But I'm looking for something a little bit more intuitive. So what I'm going to do is I have these two images. This one is taller than this one. And there's a little bit of a trick we can use in Photoshop to tell us at least closely what the ratio is. It may result in a little, depending on how you do the textures, it may result in a tiny bit of squashing, or it'll result in a tiny bit of cropping, but it'll get it very, very close. And so I have these images in here, and I'm going to use the marquee select tool. We're not actually going to be selecting anything, but the marquee select tool has a couple of settings up here. And under style, normal just means I'm going to do this, or I'm going to select this, or I'm going to select this, right? But there's one here that says fixed ratio. And because of something else I was doing, I accidentally stumbled onto the ratio of this image, which if you really look at it, it looks kind of like a tabloid image, which is 11 inches by 17 inches. This is not measuring inches. This is 11 parts to 17 parts, right? For every 11 it is wide, it is 17 high. And what that means is that as I drag this, I cannot make this a square. It will always be this exact shape. If you look, that's very close, right? That is very close to the aspect ratio of this image. If I was to set this just a little bit wider, 12 to 17, I lose a lot at the bottom, right? 11 to 17 was the closest thing. I mean, if I want to get like really tricky, I suppose I could try 11 and a half and see what happens. Right? But there we go. It is 11.2 by 17 is its aspect ratio, about as close as I'm going to get. Whereas if I tried to use that on this one, I lose this whole side. This image is wider compared to how tall it is. I did this test a little bit earlier. It seemed to be about, I already forgot the numbers. No, maybe 12 and a half. Slightly more than that. I'm adjusting based on what gets cropped off. If it can't get wide enough, then this width number is a little bit too small. Yeah. If it can't get tall enough, then the width number has gotten too big. I'm leaving the height number alone because we don't want to have two crazy numbers. So let's try 12.7. Probably going to be too wide. Oh, that actually worked out pretty well. Cool. So this is telling me the ratio of this image is 12.7 to 17. So I can go into I'm going to start from, I'm not going to use this one. I'm going to build a plane, and it's going to have all the wrong settings because I apparently didn't change that. So we're going to say one subdivision by one subdivision, and that should be 1 to 1. And right, so the width and height are 1 to 1 right now. I can change that to 12.6 and 17. Now, it's okay if it's too big. We can, whoops, E is not a number. We can shrink it later. What matters is the ratio, right? So we started at 1 to 1 so that the width is the same as the height. And then we take our information from Photoshop, 12.7 to 17. Pardon me. 12.7. There it is. All right. And what will happen is, let's make sure this is rotated properly. There we go. Now that it is this proper ratio of 12.7 to 17, now I can scale however I want. I can make it small. I can make it a really tiny picture on the wall. That ratio stays the same because this is not its overall measurements. That's its width to height ratio. Here's where your scale is. I've scaled it down, right? I've made it substantially smaller than it was. But this will match the image in a way that this one won't. All right, so I'm going to pause so I can do the UV mapping real quick. All right, so I had to do a little bit to map this, just a little bit of button pressing, but I didn't even have to go into Photoshop because I matched this to the size of the thing. Once I attached it to this file, it came out looking exactly like it. So by doing that bit of research work in Photoshop and figuring out what the aspect ratio of this image was, I was able to get it to look pretty much like the image. Like I said, it's probably off by a tiny bit, but I'm not really worrying about that. Now, that does mean I have to go into Photoshop, which for many of you probably means closing down Maya. So choose your images wisely, find out what the ratios are in Photoshop, and then close everything in Photoshop and go into Maya. But it does mean no more going back and forth. And again, I must stress, this is only for these very, very, very basic image on a plane situations. Okay, which we have two different tutorials we're going over this week that deal with this. One is pictures on a wall. One is some pretty nifty toon shading things. Not toon shading, that's the wrong word. It's like cartoon postcards in space, I guess would be a good way to put it. But this does not work for anything that needs to be like legit UV mapped. And for that, I have another example. Just to remind us of things that we were working with in the past. This frame, no, this trick that we go over where we learn the aspect ratio first. When we did this frame thing, no, this is something where you lay out the UVs, which we had done, which may still be in my file, maybe. Of course not. Why would I save anything? Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. Let's turn the image off. There it is. So laying these out, if you're doing something like this, you absolutely must go into Photoshop and put in pictures and draw and all that stuff. This is only going to work for these very, very simple planes. Now, I do have a workaround for if you want like a frame around your thing and also want a picture in it. That's in the next video. All right, so if you want to learn the aspect ratio of something, use the Marquee Select tool, set it to fixed ratio, kind of use your best judgment, start typing in a couple numbers, and then especially if there are photos or drawings, there's some art numbers you can start with. And then change that one number from there to see what will fit. Stay with smaller numbers. You don't want to be like 35 by 76 when like 2 by 4 will do. So stick with the smaller numbers. Get it as close as you can and write it down in real life so that you don't have to keep checking this.